Hello, and welcome to Green Team of the Legendarium. We're a group of Legendarium podcast fans who come together to talk about books the main pod aren't covering. I am your host, BefuddledPanda, and I am joined by Kyptan.
Heyo.
Little Red Book.
Hi.
And making her debut, Mirlyah.
Hello, everyone.
Today's episode is about romance in science fiction and fantasy. Now, before you stop listening to this episode, bear with us. We know that romance in books can be very divisive. Some people love it, and others couldn't care less, or maybe even actively avoid reading romance-centered books. In this episode, we are going to talk about why we think more people should give SFF romance stories a chance and not write them off from the start. We think there's value in these stories and invite listeners to give one of our recommendations a try. Because, that one particular vampire romance book, the one, is not representative of SFF romance as a whole. There's so much more. For this episode, we've got some general topics for discussion to start. Then we'll talk about some of the common tropes we love and hate. Throughout the episode, we will be talking about many books, but they may not actually be recommendations. If they sound interesting to you, go for it. At the end, we'll give our actual recommendations for something spicy to read. Or it may just be very sweet. Okay, warning, there will likely be discussion of some mature topics, but we shall keep that to a minimum and won't go into details. Okay, first things first. When we brought up the topic for this episode as an idea, several people on Discord requested that we differentiate between a romance book and a book with a romance. So here's an official definition for what is a romance book. There's a society called Romance Writers of America, and they say that there are two essential elements. There's a central love story and an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. A masterclass article says that these stories are aspirational, optimistic, and provide escapism. So basically, a happily ever after is a guarantee. Do you guys agree, disagree with this definition, or have anything to add?
So what I would say is that really to be classified as a romance novel, as opposed to just a book with a love story, it does have to have a happy ending. Nobody reads a romance novel to have some horrible tragedy happen.
Unless you're reading Romeo and Juliet.
That's not a romance.
God. That's a tragedy.
Not. No, that's... Don't even get me started.
Yeah. And when they say optimistic in that definition, they really do mean they end up in a pairing it works by either the end of the book or like the trilogy that it's a part of or something. They get together. And that is a definite, has to happen sort of thing. Sure, it can be like a happily after for now, and then maybe later there's more strife and you get a sequel book.
Right.
But then that also resolves within the book and it's a happily ever after for a character.
Right.
So, yes, there can still be strife and chaos, but it has to have that happy ending.
Yeah,
now,
I agree.
You can have a really great book with a great love story that doesn't end that way, but then it's not a romance. It's just a book with a love story.
Yeah. Even if that's all the book is about.
Yeah.
I definitely think that romance books have to have a happy ending, a happily ever after. Maybe not so much a happy ending, but they need to have some sort of happily ever after where the two characters are together. A lot of books that may be in a series that start off as a very heavy romance heavy book in subsequent books often turn into a book with romance as opposed to having the romance as central to the plot, but the end of that book is usually always still a happily ever after.
Okay. Yeah, I think the main part is, aside from the happy ending, it's that central love story. Because, there are a lot of books that have romance in it, but there's so much other stuff happening that's outside of the characters who are in the romance. And that's typically the books that I read. But I mean, when I need a pick-me-up, like right now, I went to a romance book because I knew it's going to have a happy ending. And I'm here for the ride. So Green Team's biggest fan, Lady Sweden, she said on Discord, in regards to talking about romance, I think it's interesting to talk a little bit about what they add to our TBRs in our reading. For example, some level 1 entertainment palate cleanser to prevent burnout. I suspect some of the dudes that are skeptical on Discord to the subgenre have other types of subgenre books for the same purpose. So let's first tackle, why do you think people are skeptical about reading romance-heavy books?
First off, shout out to the Cradle Boys.
We're not naming names, but kind of.
Only two of us.
Yeah, like why does romance in books get such a bad rep? What are common criticisms of romance in their books?
I mean, there's a lot of really bad romance out there. It's
That's
just,
true.
it's just
Yep.
a fact. There are people who read solely romance and they buy it by the basket. Like, I'm gonna say, I'm not trying to be mean, but there are people
Buy the
out
milk
there.
crate.
Yeah, exactly. And they
Well-
sit there with their. Okay, I'm gonna stop because I'm gonna get mean. There are people who write like 100 books a year, and you're not gonna get quality writing 100 books a year. You're just not. It's
But I mean, I read a lot of weekly comics, and each one of those little strips is not necessarily going to blow up anyone's mind. But together, a comic can be fairly insightful, and like the greatest examples of them, say like, I don't know, XKCD can be informative and even politically
Mhm.
active.
Yes.
And romance, sure, maybe 90% of it is bad, and maybe some of the most extreme bodice rippers are fun to read excerpts out of in college and make fun of. But there are well-written, well-crafted love stories that give me things that I can't find elsewhere in fiction. Romances are definitely one of the places where it's more okay to talk about deeper or more intimate emotions
Hmm.
that aren't like life and death struggles all the time, and that have a happier and also like a more homey feel to them. These
Mhm.
romances often capture day-to-day activities of a normal everyday person a lot better than most other kinds of stories. Definitely most other like popular published fantasy stories.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree. Mirlyah, what do you think?
So, I guess to think about the question, why are people skeptical about reading romance-heavy books? What if you put yourself in the shoes of someone who doesn't typically read romance? It's not one of us. When you say romance, what books do you think of?
Captive Prince. But also
That's just
Danielle
you, Kip.
Steele. I think of Danielle Steele.
Yeah.
Danielle Steele,
Yeah.
Nicholas
Mills and
Spark.
Boon as a publisher. Any Mills and Boon books? I don't know if that's an Australian thing. What else is there?
There's Bridgerton, which is really popular right now, by Julia Quinn, and I mean Nicholas Spark, like
Outlander.
The Notebook,
Nicholas Sparks.
Outlander.
Yeah.
Outlander. Oh, and I've only read the first one because once you get past that, it's
Okay.
it's just not good. It's not good. 50 Shades of
Ouch.
Grey, I think, is probably
Yeah.
what some people think of.
Yeah.
Which I tried to read it. I read 2 chapters and I'm like, this is bad. And I think that's why people are skeptical of romance because it's just bad. I mean,
and I think that's part of the reason the books that make it into popular fiction and that get a lot of talking about and make it into the media, they're not great. They're actually pretty poor examples of how good romance books can be. So that one vampire book that Panda mentioned earlier, 50 Shades of Grey, also made it into popular fiction and became super popular, but they're not really strongly indicative of the quality of romance as a genre.
I mean, I think that's true for like any genre too, right? Like there are definitely popular fantasy books where the quality isn't necessarily in the writing or the storytelling, but there's something about it that captures readers' attention, and it's either like fast paced, it's fun, it's not as heavy, and people just gobble it up. And I think there's something that we're kind of sidestepping a little bit, and I'll just bring it up. People, I think, tend to equate romance books with smut, right? And think that that's just all that there is for romance books. But in reality, there's really a spectrum. And I think, Kip, you have some thoughts about this. So I'll pass
Oh,
it over
yeah.
to you.
I have a thing I said, didn't I?
You do.
Yes, you did.
You did.
Okay. So I want to say that there's a misconception that romance novels are a euphemism for smut. But eroticism in romance is a wide spectrum with a variety of ways to handle, celebrate, or veil sexual content. Explicit sex scenes are more common in romance than in other genres, but I can easily list multiple non-romance books with explicit sex scenes and multiple romances with only fade to black depictions. Romance as a genre is not about the level of sex displayed on screen. It is about the level of interpersonal intimacy that you get to see between two characters.
Hmm.
100%.
And there's a difference between erotic fiction and romance.
There
Yes.
absolutely is.
Oh,
Erotic
yes.
fiction can be a subset of romance, and it can also just be a subset of fantasy, because there's a lot of erotic fiction without happily ever afters. Or I assume there are. I don't really know. I assume there are.
I mean, probably.
Because I have at least seen like spoiler listings of AO3, and I know that character death is one of their spoilers.
Oh
One
dear.
of their like tags you can put on things.
Okay, for people who don't know what AO3 is, can you just explain a little bit?
So AO3 is called Archive. It's Archive of Our Own. AO3 is the acronym, and it is, I think, it's the largest internet repository of fan fiction writings.
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty influential on romance as a genre, and especially on sci-fi and fantasy romance as a genre. A lot of published authors have come out of writing AO3 fan fiction, including, I think, 50 Shades of Grey.
Yes. Yes, it
Yes.
was. It was that vampire books
Hmm.
fanfic.
So actually, Kip, you did bring up something, which is like there is a lot of fanfic romance that is SFF. So what do you guys think makes the science fiction and fantasy romance different from other types of romance? Because there's definitely like contemporary romance, historical romance. What do you think makes SFF romance different, special, or valuable?
Magic.
Magic.
I will always defend things with magic and advanced technology in them as ways to convey ideas that aren't otherwise possible. I
Yeah.
will always defend that.
What would be like one of your main defense?
It gives a level of remove for certain experiences that maybe is helpful in portraying the story as comfort instead of drama. You can have something as dark as like the Broken Earth series, and because there's a bit of science fiction veneer over that, it's not a direct representation of any real life issues on Earth. It is its own completely invented secondary world. There's no direct connections, but what you see in the humanity of each story, that transfers along. You still get these human moments, and you get these human emotions and pains and joys, but you don't get like, oh, this is what happened to me last Tuesday, because because there's no geomages that happened to you last Tuesday.
I don't get the reference, but eventually I will when I read the series.
I don't know about you,
I
Kip,
could use any fully secondary world story.
Hmm. Yeah. Little Red?
Oh, I was just going to make a snotty comment about geomages.
Okay. But do you have thoughts? Because you said magic.
No, I mean, because I like reading books with magic in them. I like reading books that don't take place on Earth. And so basically, I would repeat everything that Kip said,
Okay.
except for the thing about Broken Earth.
Yeah, Broken Earth is a heavy story, but it's made lighter by being in a secondary world.
Mm.
It's made more disconnected from like your everyday life.
Little Red doesn't quite agree, but that's fine.
I mean, would you have rather that it took place in like antebellum South or something?
I would rather have not read it.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay. But let's clarify.
Okay, so I'm going to clarify because it's a very, very well. The first one is the only one I've read. Very well written book. It's great. The author's amazing. But I also read it right at the start of the plague that we're currently in, and I think that really affected my enjoyment of it.
Long
To be
timing for
honest.
you.
Yeah. So
That happens. Yeah.
It does kind of take place in a world that is ending.
yes, and it kind of felt like the world was ending when I read
mean,
the book.
it still kind of is, but anyway. Mirlyah, what are your thoughts about what makes SFF romance special or different?
I really like the way that SFF as a genre can take two individuals and throw them into a world that is so different from our own, where they go on adventures, go and fight battles, go and do things together. And it's the actions that the two characters have with each other and often with their surroundings and other people that creates the relationship and the character development and the romance and the relationships that they build with each other. Which, when you think about our lives as they are now, we don't exactly go and say, oh, hey, I'm just going to take a horse and go, spend 3 days in the forest looking for something. It just doesn't happen. I mean, sure, there are definitely people who can do that. It gives the story an element that is more open to imagination, and the setting is a little. It's a fantastical setting.
Yeah, I think maybe what you're trying to say is it just gives the author more freedom to put characters into different kinds of situations and have different kinds of inputs to either stimulate the relationship or put pressures on the relationship, cause that tension. Maybe like a giant squid is coming at you and you have to run for your lives, and that causes tension, but also a bonding moment for the characters. I don't know.
No, that's actually a really fun aspect of Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies. Is that Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet start fighting zombies together. It's just fun.
I haven't read that version, but
The
maybe
Ladies of
I'll
the
look into
Legendarium did an episode on it.
Yep.
My backlog is so big. It's okay.
And the reason why I use that as a reference is because most of us have at least some familiarity with
Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah,
for sure. I don't think we can have a discussion about romance and fantasy without acknowledging, because we've already kind of acknowledged this, but like paranormal romance has played a significant role in like shaping the subgenre.
True Blood was one of the most successful shows.
Yes, it was. Yeah. What is it about paranormal romance, do you think, that is so appealing to authors, like for them to write about and for readers to read? Let's go with Mirlyah first. Any thoughts? We're not going to say the T word.
I think that there is an amount of familiarity that people have with the types of characters, the races of characters that you get in paranormal romance. So you've your vampires and your werewolves being the most predominant in that genre. And you say vampire and there's a picture that immediately comes into your head. And you say werewolf and there's a picture that immediately comes into your head. Whereas you start going into some other fantasy genres and, we start talking about certain races that an author may have just made up, and it's a little bit less accessible to the wider population. And I think that's part of the reason why people who may be interested in reading romance as a genre will be more likely to head into paranormal romance than they would to run into a fantasy romance as such. And I think that is part of the reason that makes it so appealing to authors, because it can encompass a greater audience and their work can be seen by a greater number of people.
Okay. Yeah. Little Red.
I don't think I have anything to add.
Okay.
I do like a good vampire novel, and werewolves are cool. That's what I can add to
honestly,
that.
I think that's a great point. I think that is a great point, Red. Werewolves are cool. Vampires are cool. These are they're cool archetypes that have survived multiple generations of storytelling. They're centuries of storytelling. These are folk tales, like Red is always telling us about. There's stories that
Look, I
have
wrote a
persisted
very
the
important
ages.
paper on this.
And like for one reason or another, vampires are sexy in a lot of tellings and to a lot of people. Werewolves, sexy. They're a different thing. They're like a primal thing instead of like a seductive upper class aristocratic
Mhm.
thing. But they have their own like little appeal. I'm not sure what ghosts say about people.
Well, I mean, fairies also. And when I say fairies, I mean like,
Oh yeah,
you know,
fairies. Yep.
fairies are cool too. I
Fairies,
mean, there's how
elves,
many what?
elves.
Elves. Yes.
Elves, both the like pretty kind and the dark and scary kind.
And I think that one of the things that vampires and werewolves do is it addresses the very real thing that there's sex is dangerous. Love is dangerous. Does that make sense? Like there's this element of danger that is real because when you open yourself up in that way to somebody, it is dangerous.
Like,
They can
okay,
steal your soul.
like it's risky putting
Yeah,
yourself
no,
out
it's
there.
emotionally dangerous. Not that
Okay.
not that you're gonna.
I mean,
Actually,
in a lot of these books, it is physically dangerous.
Yes,
well,
exactly.
yeah, but I mean, it's what I'm saying is that those tropes touch on the fact that actually it's dangerous for you personally in an emotional way,
Sure.
and that's
I have
why we tell stories about that.
That rich, well-dressed man who wants you to come into his mansion might be a vampire.
Or he might just get you pregnant and leave you
Yep.
hanging to dry. Have to dry. I mean,
there's your allegory with real day life at a
Yep.
remove.
exactly.
I think there's also an element of that whole thought process that something that is dangerous is or can be thought of hand in hand with. I don't know how to explain it properly.
Dangerous is sexy.
Dangerous is sexy, but also the thought of doing something that you're not supposed to gives you almost a very similar feeling to falling in love with someone, if that makes sense.
the thrill, the adrenaline. Yeah, I think, I mean, there are 2 points that come to mind. One is like with characters or with creatures that are like werewolves and vampires, there's this built-in tension because they are typically dangerous creatures.
And predators to humans.
And has prejudice to humans.
Can I just state now that I hate that romanticization? I hate that aspect of it. Okay.
Yeah. That's totally fair for you to hate it.
Like I will acknowledge that it's there, but I will hate it.
we can talk more about your hate when we get to tropes.
Sure.
But I mean, there is that like shorthand for creating that tension, that drama that the characters need to overcome, and also like the seduction of it. I think, Kip, you were saying that, you know, for werewolves, but also for vampires, there's this very primal nature to these creatures. I mean, the romance, it is a primal, like, attraction, right? It is a primal thing for humans. And so I think by using characters who people accept the primalness of, you kind of get past some of that, I don't know how to call it, like prudism, I guess, prudishness. And it's more acceptable for some relationships to be formed and like things to happen because it's like, oh, well, it's the nature of these creatures. I don't know.
I hate that.
I'm sorry.
I hate that idea.
It
but
works.
I think Panda's right. I think that is part of it. Is it like does do something about barriers that maybe some people have?
I think there's a critique that like modern men are not necessarily in touch with their primal natures anymore, and women want someone who assuredly is.
No, that is a critique.
Yep. And I also am going to disagree with this, but
but it's an element that's out there, and
oh yeah,
and there's a certain.
I mean the gay community has its rivalries with twinks and bears and all sorts of fun things like that, and that's basically the difference between like the guy who's in a rom-com, you know, how that there's always the dude who's loves his business and then the woman goes away to a town and they try and do a long distance thing, but she reconnects with the dude from her past who like lives in flannel shirts outdoors chopping wood.
And he's a widower. He's always a widower.
Yes, and he's a widower.
Or
a
like
child.
some unavailable bachelor. Yeah.
But his table manners are bad.
Okay, I mean, I'll just confess, like, I love Christmas romance films. I love them.
Okay.
So what you just described, yeah, I'll watch it most likely.
Yep.
I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff out
And then
there.
just add that he's the son of Santa and we're in paranormal romance.
I don't know if I've actually
That's
seen that one.
Another one. Another trope I hate so much. I hate it.
Okay, maybe it's time to move on because we're gonna talk about our tropes. Okay, so Eridandus asked, "What makes a good romance? How is romance different than other relationships in books?" And I think this is a good segue for us to get to our discussion of tropes that we love and hate. And if we don't cover any tropes that listeners you love or hate, join us on the Legendariums Discord or find us on Twitter and let us know what we missed. But let's start with Kip. Kip,
Okay.
which trope do you want to talk about? Do you love it, hate it? Why?
I feel like I've been dissing on a lot of things recently, so I'll go with the trope that I love, and that is Journey to the Center of the Mind. This trope involves one person inserting themselves into the head of another. Done without consent or for harm, this is mind rape, but that's a different trope, not this one. But when it's done to heal, it can be an interesting form of therapy. It allows for the conveyance of detailed and nuanced concepts between two people and an especially intimate bond. In real life, it's impossible to show someone the darkest days of your life and have them understand it. In fantasy, you can just actually make that happen. You can insert one character into another's head and have them relive whatever circumstance you need for the narrative to continue. It's wish fulfillment for people who want to simply show instead of tell. It's a bearing of the soul and allows for both a vulnerability and a strength that are nigh impossible to achieve in real life, but can provide the foundation for an excellently dramatic grand gesture. I think the reason I like it so much is that sometimes I also think about what's going on inside people's heads, and it's a lot of fun to imagine what it might be. I'm also pretty bad at telling stories, and the idea of simply getting to show them is appealing. Some examples include Inception, Paprika, Neon Genesis Evangelion, and The Knight and the Necromancer. Something that's incredibly close to fitting into this category is Fun Home, where the narrator of the play is the adult version of the author who then guides you through their childhood and adolescence as they're reenacted on stage, including first romances.
The thing that I picked out from there is Kip likes to imagine what happens in our heads. I'm kind of scared.
Dear God.
Happens in my head. It's not just cotton candy in here, okay?
Oh no.
I'm sure. You're too good at spreadsheets.
So I really hate romances involving mind reading. I hate them so much. It just makes me insane because we all think things about people in our life, even if it's just like a fleeting thing that we do not want them to know about because it's mean or you're mad. And it's not even something you mean. Like my kid does something annoying and I want to punch him in the face. And I think I want to punch him in the face. I'm not actually going to punch him in the face. And I don't really want to punch him in the face. It's the same in love relationships. Like if you have to be in your lover's head and know every single thing that goes through their brain, I don't want them knowing everything that goes through my brain. That's not healthy.
Actually, I have a question. So for this trope, like if a character, sees another, not their love interest, but like a different character and think, oh, this person is attractive, or I would like to get to know this person. Is that usually how like tension is created between the love
So
interest?
for Journey in the Center of the Mind, it's usually more like you're going deep into this person's psyche.
Okay.
It's usually like you're finding out what is holding this character back from happiness in more cases than most.
Oh,
So
okay.
not straight up mind reading.
It's not whatever's going on like the surface of your thoughts at the moment. It's like the person is maybe comatose in grief and the other person goes in to help them work through their trauma.
Okay.
That's what happens most often. That's the kind of situation that I really like it employed in.
Got it. So it is more of that therapist role than a telepathic.
It's not like everyday telepathy. This is like a fantastic voyage, but for the mind.
Okay, cool. Thank you for the clarification.
And so I rescind everything I just said
Okay.
about your trope, not about mind
Awesome.
reading.
So basically, what I think is going to happen in this episode is everybody's going to say what their favorite trope is, and then LRB is just going to be like, I hate that.
And if LRB doesn't, I will.
I
Which is
don't
totally fine.
I don't have strong opinions. I don't know what you're talking about.
Uh-huh. Which is totally
Yeah.
fine because, I mean, I think what this demonstrates is there is such a big spectrum of tropes, even within the romance genre. There could be something out there for you, somebody who doesn't necessarily read romance, but there could be a romance book out there for you. Oh, go ahead.
Journey to the Center of the Mind. Sometimes it's like the person whose mind is reliving the event. Sometimes they think that event is why no one can ever love them. And that is why they are permanently broken. And then their love interest comes in, sees what's going on, and never once thinks that it makes them unlovable, but is maybe super angry at whoever put them in that situation.
Mm.
And
Got
seeing
it.
that completely different reaction to the events can sometimes help the person who was hurt move forward.
Mhm.
And it's not even necessarily even something that like they were told or something that was done for them, but just by being able to shift their perspective maybe really helps them out. Getting another point of view and being able to
Okay.
share something that you thought would make people leave you alone forever. So yeah, I like that.
All right. Next, Mirlyah, would you like to share with us one of your tropes?
Sure. I had a lot of trouble picking a trope for my favourite and my least favourite because of the common tropes that are out there, there are things that I like about the tropes and there are things that I don't like about the tropes. And I think that they very heavily rely on how well the author can put their own spin on the tropes themselves. But the one that I've chosen as my favourite is your fairy tale retellings, but specifically Beauty and the Beast. So everyone, I assume everyone, knows what the Beauty and the Beast storyline follows. But
Sure.
why I like reading these sorts of books is not necessarily because you've got your stock standard character who is Beauty or is who might actually be called Beauty, or whether it's just the character that is to be in place of Beauty. And then you've got your Beast character. It's looking at the development of these two characters throughout the story. So I like the fact that these retellings generally start out with two characters who are not perfect, but they undergo development that is a result of the interaction that they have with each other. Quite often, the female in the situation, if we're talking about a standard male-female pairing, the females are usually quite a strong female lead who are not afraid to fight for what they believe in. Obviously, it doesn't always happen that way, and it depends on what the author has chosen to write in their version of the retelling. But I feel like that is part of why I like delving into some of these stories. But I also like the deeper level of love that these characters can experience, partly because in most situations, the main female character has fallen in love with the Beast, not because of his physical appearance, but because of his personality and the actions that he's done and the way that he has proven himself to have changed over the course of the book because of the character, and shown himself to be a lot more of a kind, caring, loving, whatever else character that he wasn't at the start, which was usually the reason why he was cursed in the first place. And so it's not just a demonstration of superficial physical attraction between two characters that causes them to fall in love, but something deeper. Now, bearing in mind that not all Beauty and the Beast retellings are well written, and there are some issues with some Beauty and the Beast retellings which I don't like, which a lot of them will take the element of Beauty being captured by the Beast to another level. And rather than have Beauty willingly go to the Beast, she's captured in some way, and we end up with some sort of a captive romance, which can sometimes border on a level of Stockholm syndrome, which is not always the best, but it's captive romance is a trope in itself. And for such a simple story, these retellings are not always well written, and it quite often relies on the author taking the trope and putting their own spin on it, putting a little bit of a twist on the story somehow to make it work well.
Yeah. I think something you called out is that a lot of romance stories do tend to have strong female characters. That is, according to Romance Writers of America, or Masterclass, whichever article I read, it is a defining attribute of romance, which is nice. And I mean, even now, though, like okay, let me just put it this way. More different kinds of people are reading romance. It's not just like maybe what you think of middle-aged women are. It's not just like that demographic is reading romance. Like younger readers are reading romance. I mean,
I read less romance than all of you.
I am not middle-aged yet, but eventually I will be. So I will be in that category. But at the moment, I am not. Kip is not in that category, so neither is Mirlyah.
Yeah, I'm the oldest for sure.
But I mean, just with between the four of us, like there's so much diversity already in terms of what we prefer to see in romance and our own demographics. Yeah, so I think it's strong female characters has been a staple, but we're also seeing more diversity being portrayed in romance-centered stories, whether that's ethnicity, sexual preference, sexual identity, right? Which is refreshing. There's still a ways to go. In terms of the captive romance trope, yeah, I think there are some that could be done really well, but if it's purely captive romance trope, it does tend to be more problematic. I don't read many of those, so I can't really say. Yes, Little Red.
It's a guilty pleasure for me. Like,
Which
I
is
would never
fine.
recommend a captive romance to anybody. But here's the thing with it, and it relates to Beauty and the Beast. There's always an element of a strong woman taming the virile man.
Which is almost like sexism in a way, too.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a different sort of sexism.
Most fairy tale retellings have that element, though.
Well, but they're
being saved. Yeah. I think what I like about Beauty and the Beast compared to some of your other fairy tales, like your Cinderella or your Snow White, or even to some degree Rapunzel, apart from Tangled, which was a much better version of Rapunzel than the original.
Depends on which version you read.
It is the fact that the female is a much more integral part to the romance of the story than it is just about this prince falling in love with a princess in distress.
Right.
Yep. Agree.
Yeah. I like it when both characters are strong. Hey, maybe that's just me.
No, it's not just you. You'll see more to come. Okay, Little Red. Do you have a trope you want to talk about, or do you want to just react to our tropes?
Well, I'm having a lot of fun reacting. So the one I picked is I kind of picked two, but I think they're very strongly related, and that is marriage of convenience and forced proximity.
Yes.
It's most of us fall in love because we're forced into a situation with people. And I like court politics, and that's marriage of convenience. So that's about all I have to say about that.
That's fine.
It's well established that like one of the prime necessities of relationship forming is close proximity.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Like that's just basic psychological relationship science.
Yep.
Which is part of the reason why the captive romance works as a trope.
Kip's like, maybe.
I mean,
not really.
Stockholm syndrome has zero scientific basis, so
that's not what those romances do. That's not what they're about.
But I've read too many Stockholm syndrome romances.
Okay, well, that's a personal problem.
So tell me which ones those are, and I won't read them.
Bel Canto.
Okay, cool.
Yep. A widely regarded excellent book, but it has Stockholm syndrome in it.
I was going to say, but one of the things I really like, particularly marriage of convenience is it usually brings in a lot of fun political intrigue too into the
Yeah.
story. So
Mhm. I agree. I also enjoy that trope, and it actually kind of flows into my. I'm gonna go with my favorite and my least favorite together because they're a bit related. So my favorite is enemies to lovers, and then my least favorite is insta love. So enemies to lovers, which tends to also be written with forced proximity, because how else are the
right.
enemies gonna form a relationship? But I really enjoy it because, and enemies to lovers, I mean, it is exactly what it sounds like. Characters who don't like each other for whatever reason ends up falling for each other, and then insta love is people see each other for the first time and they immediately fall in love and they're like, oh my goodness, we're soulmates. The enemies to lovers I like because it's more realistic than insta love. It has that built-in tension, which I love banter. I love good banter, and that tends to occur when it's the enemies to lovers trope. Typically, like when you have people who just don't like each other, you watch the development of them learning about each other and getting to know each other. And that's what's the interesting part of the romance. And there's, at first, especially if you're going into a book not knowing that trope exists, there is that will they, won't they thing going on. I enjoy that.
I think there's within the enemies to lovers tropes, I think that there's lots of young adult fiction that looks at this. So you've got your two individuals who live on different sides of the land, the land is always at war with each other, for instance, and for whatever reason these two individuals get thrust together and they've just got this mutual hatred of each other because that's what they've always been taught to do. And I think that I agree, the development of those characters and learning about each other and learning that they're both similar in whether or not they're both human or they're both elves, or they've got things in common with each other that they wouldn't
They both
otherwise
hate
have
the same
realized.
person.
And they discover that they're both people, or whatever the humanoid creature or race is that is in the book.
They're both being chased through a haunted death castle together, and they need to trust each other to survive.
Yeah. Exactly. That giant squid that I was talking about. I don't know which book that is, but I'm sure it exists somewhere.
It's in Girl Genius.
20,000 Leagues Under
and it's
the
mechanical.
Oh, okay. It's also in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but there's no romance in that.
Yeah, I didn't think there was. But I think there is something that we've talked about but not explicitly said. Romance stories are character-driven stories. So if you really don't like character-driven stories, I think that makes sense why you wouldn't like romance stories as much. So just clarifying that. But I enjoy character-driven stories, but I also enjoy like action, plot-driven, court intrigue-driven. So it just depends on my mood. And currently I'm in the mood for character-driven and romance and banter. So.
Whereas I'm normally someone who reads from magic systems and world building.
But he also likes romance stories. So there you go.
But I like romance. Hey.
Yeah.
I like a good punching book too.
Especially because I like when the world building is, oh, hey, there's no homophobia in this world. That's great world building to me.
I mean,
the bar
that's
is
fair.
so low. Okay, what I will say about insta-love is falling in love upon first sight. Like, sure, maybe some people that really does happen to them. It to me is not very realistic. Instant attraction, I accept. Like, I admit that does happen. I think there's a difference between instant attraction and falling in love with somebody that you've just met.
I completely agree in that. Like, yes, you can tell that a dude is hot immediately, but you don't immediately in your head have a 5-minute long session where you think, oh my God, this person is the one for me. Like, unless you're the comic relief character in a Bollywood film. Like,
oh dear. Yeah.
Any particular Bollywood film?
My name is Avi.
Oh dear.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between insta love and instant attraction, but I find there's a lot of people who try and defend scenes as like, oh, it's not insta love, it's instant attraction. And I'm like, this dude just said that this woman is the most beautiful person they've ever met. They felt an instant draw to them, lost track of time, almost went to the bottom of the sea with their song. This doesn't seem like normal infatuation to me. This seems like, oh, this person's going to be my wife in 40 pages.
Are you talking about a siren?
I'm talking about someone who had some heavy siren theming in their introductory chapter.
Okay, but it wasn't actually sirens.
No, it wasn't actually a siren.
Oh dear. Yeah, see, I read romance for the character development, and insta love to me is just you're taking out the best part of the romance. So that's for me.
No, I'm not going to critique.
Oh,
I'm
go
not
ahead.
going to critique you on that one because that is also something I really hate.
Yeah.
I really hate insta love.
I'm like not clear you can call things with insta love actual romances. There's no romantic story. There's
Probably
like
some
no romantic storyline if they're in love on page 1.
It probably works for erotica. I mean,
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if, the tension building, the getting together part isn't the main point of the story.
You know what? I think it works in sequels. Because at that point, it's not insta love. It's insta love that happened in a different book, in a previous book. So,
Well, see,
by that point,
not
but that's
not insta love.
no.
There's relationship
I'm
building.
saying that like the relationship can be written well in a book if it happened in a previous book. If like the insta love got out of the way in a previous book, like but the sequel is good, then I think it's a romance. But if it's
Do you have an example?
A Civil Campaign by Lois McMaster Bujold.
that is so good. It's so good.
Okay. I will read that at some point.
It is kind of a
Really?
rom-com, yeah.
It's
I
a
didn't know
rom-com.
Bujold wrote rom-com.
Well, she did for this book.
Okay, I'm sold. I will wait. How many books do I have to read before I get to A Civil Campaign?
I think you could just read it, but Kip will yell at me.
You can't just read this one. You got to read at least like 3 before this one.
Oh my god.
Isn't it like book 8?
It is like book 8, but it's the second book for one character, and like you only really need 2 books from another character to get into it. So 3 books you need to read before this one. That's it.
So like the first 2 books you can read like as we're getting off topic.
I might throw in a 4th ideally, but yes, 3 or 4.
Okay, we'll continue this conversation later. Listeners, if you're interested, come to Discord or something. I don't know.
Because there's like some clone shenanigans.
Okay. Moving on to tropes. Mirlyah, what is your least favorite trope? Talked about your favorite. What's your least favorite?
My least favorite I have written down as protect the love interest, but it goes a little bit further than that. And it is where you have 2 characters who one will generally is the one that you're following, so the point of view character. Often it might be split, but one will often have a stronger feeling for the other character, and they spend the entire book finding ways to protect the other character from getting into trouble, including from themselves. This person just ends up being so self-sacrificing and so like, I'm not worthy enough to be with this other character, that it just turns into a depressing story that ends up feeling a little bit more like a tragedy than anything else.
Yeah. Remember, optimistic. Like, yes, there needs to be conflict, but I don't really want to read like depression or.
I mean, I would love to read a romantic fantasy with like a healer and a tank of a D&D party.
Okay.
That makes it super weird because I'm the healer and my son is the tank.
Okay, let me put it this way. I think that could work. I think that could actually work. But it's because of the nature that a person is a healer and the other person is, suicidal, I guess. I don't know.
That's pretty
on the front line.
Pretty accurate.
Yeah.
You've got the big buff tank and then you have the small cleric.
Yeah.
It's great.
I think I can see that working, but I don't think this trope really works often.
I mean,
Sure.
I think
It gets really annoying. That's the thing.
Absolutely gets annoying.
It's like, let the person be their own person and make their own decisions. Stop trying to because I think typically there's also like miscommunication trope in there, and I really don't like miscommunication tropes.
Yes.
Which is why you need a journey to the center of the mind.
Or even if it's not miscommunication, it's omission of vital
Yeah.
information that they're trying to keep from them because they think that they're protecting their love interest from this information, which is actually very important.
Yeah.
And I can think of thousands and thousands of, well, not thousands, but movies, books, miscommunication, withholding vital information.
Right.
Screws everything up, and it's all because plot. It needs to happen for the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, not for the characters, but for the plot.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. It does tend to be it's so predictable because you're whoever is being protected, you already know what their response is going to be. There's no mystery whatsoever. Very rarely. They're going to resent the person and then they're going to go off, do their own thing, probably get in danger, and then, is going to get saved anyway. And then they're like, oh, okay, fine. I was wrong. I forgive you. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Anyway.
One of my favorite book series has this as an ongoing theme throughout the series. So, but it's not a romance series. It just happens to be a thing that happens in the books.
A little dose of it is fine, but the central part of it, no.
Right.
Cool. I think we all agreed on that one.
We did. I already said what I hated, which is the mind reading thing, but it's different than what Kip was talking about because it's when you meet a person and you have destiny and there's mind reading because you're soul, whatever.
That's Insula by a different name.
Yeah, and I've read a couple books. Anyway, you heard what I said. I do not approve.
We do not approve.
Soulmates are polyphobic.
Yes, they are. Kip, let's go to you for your least favorite trope.
My least favorite trope. Okay, ABO. I'm going to go there. ABO, also known as the Omegaverse, is a trope so specific it made its own subgenre. It came to my attention when I saw some articles and videos about it and an especially litigious author who had attempted to claim ownership of it in 2018 to 2020. I then tried to read a sample of the works because it sounded hilarious, but I couldn't get through a single one. The first commercially published novel was released in 2007, and it's one of the most popular types of fiction on AO3. I think last time I checked it was number 3.
Oh.
The trope is essentially defined as werewolf erotic fiction with strictly stratified dominance hierarchies with alphas, betas, and omegas. It originated in the 1960s fan fiction stories about Star Trek's Vulcan Pon farr, but it's come a long way since then. As an explicitly sexual trope, it's already starting at a disadvantage with me because I prefer my romance books to fade to black more often than not, but ABO practically demands that sexual tones pervade the entire narrative. The world depicted is one composed of aggressive, hypersexual, stereotypically masculine alphas and fragile, stereotypically feminine omegas, with optional betas that exist somewhere between the two, usually closer to alphas. Somewhat interestingly, gender doesn't have to be linked to any of those types. Uninterestingly, it often is. Even less interestingly, the relations between the types is often chock full of sexual violence, which is often portrayed as natural, sexy, and unavoidable. I'm not going to enjoy a trope that normalizes the idea that some people are born to be raped/owned. I don't mean to kick shame anyone who enjoys this trope, but it's 100% not for me.
What kind of rabbit hole did you go down, Kip? Oh my God.
It's the number 3 most popular thing on AO3.
Okay, sure.
I need to go and find that now.
I'm sure Kip can point you to the litigious author that he tried to read.
There's a lot of genre definers that I did not even include because I think they're too filthy to say on this podcast.
Oh dear.
But yes, that's fine. That's a separate
We've
thing.
already had issues with that.
So the romance book that I'm reading does feature werewolves, and there is the alpha, beta, omega, but it's not this trope because it's not that the alpha, betas, omegas are in the relationship. It's more of the alpha is in a relationship with a different character that is not a werewolf.
Oh, interesting. So yeah, this definitely not this
Yeah.
trope.
I mean, this has been very educational for me. So on that lovely note, everybody.
Oh, no one has anything to say?
I don't know what to say.
What am I going to say to that? This is not
any-
for me either. Like,
Yes.
you describe it, and I'm like, I don't want to read that. That's what
Okay.
I have
Yep.
to say.
I have
I
a
had
question.
it.
Oh, go ahead.
I had a thought about how alpha, beta, omega romance could work without going into that sort of level of sexual violence and that level of description.
It's really disturbing. Yeah.
It would then probably not be that genre anymore. It would probably just be a werewolf book, a werewolf romance book that incorporates alpha, beta, and omega as ranks. But
It also makes me really upset because I know as a biologist that alpha, beta, like omega has absolutely zero basis in real science. And like the original study that caused that whole pop trend to exist in the first place was retracted.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a kids movie called Alpha and Omega?
I don't know.
Like a
I mean,
thing.
that's probably separate. They're just Greek letters at that point.
Yes, they are Greek letters. So,
But-
Indeed.
Like alpha and omega outside of this trope just refers to like the beginning and the end.
And also Greek
But,
letters.
yeah.
yes, yes.
But the like rigidly stratified society based off of a discredited piece of pop psychology about animals,
specifically wolves.
specifically wolves, that was like a misinterpretation that only applied during mating seasons anyways. No, I'm not here for that.
It really got under your skin, didn't it?
Honestly, every time someone says they're an alpha or beta personality or says that anyone else is, it gets under my skin.
I'm
Kid
a
was very
dolphin.
angry.
Thank you. Actually, I don't want to say that either because dolphins do bad things. So never mind.
Yes, they do.
So do people. It's fine.
Right?
Yes, but I don't want to equate myself to the bad things that the dolphins do. Which
Panda,
now
we
we're
all,
Sure.
when you said that, all thought bad things about you the second you said
Great.
you were a dolphin.
Thank
We
you.
were very upset.
Oh, we're gonna cut this, and we're gonna move on now.
Great.
So thank you for sharing your tropes, your least favorite and your favorite. And sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't, and that's fine. Let's get to the recommendations because we've now talked through like some of the things that we enjoy. But what would you recommend to somebody who maybe doesn't read quite a bit of romance? What would be like a good entry point for SFF specifically romance? Let's start with Little Red. What you got?
Well, I've got one that is definitely a romance and another one that is probably erotica, not romance.
Okay.
So I'm going to recommend Beguilement by Lois McMaster Bujold. Anyway, I'm not going to summarize it. I didn't summarize it. Read it. It's good.
It says, girl abused by society loses her unborn child to an evil thing that strips life of all things within its reach. She is saved by a man whose people are sworn to save the world from these things.
There you go. And then the erotica one is called,
Yes.
it's called Mona Lisa Awakens by Sunny. And it is erotica, but it's a
Okay.
lot of fun.
Is there like a general premise?
So a girl who doesn't know who she is finds out she's a magical creature and she's like half the magical creature, and then she like gets reunited with her clan, and then shenanigans.
Shenanigans, indeed. We'll just leave it at that. Okay.
Yeah, you don't want me to get more specific.
No, because you'll recognize that story is totally insta-love.
Oh no, it is. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying if you're looking for something a little spicy.
Which is fair. No shame here. Okay. Mirlyah, what are your recommendations?
I tend to read a lot of young adult romance. There seems to be more of it, or at least I find more of it than I can find of adult science fiction fantasy romance. My first recommendation, I think, is actually quite a good starting point for someone who hasn't read romance before. And it's Radiance by Grace Draven. She is an indie author, so I don't know that her book is super widely available, but I think it is on Amazon and Kindle. This book is about two royals who are considered throwaways by their respective families due to their distance from inheriting the throne. And they are used by their families to create an alliance between these two nations. So it's that forced marriage, close proximity, romance trope. The only problem is that she is human and he is of a race called Kai, who are an ancient humanoid race whose sharp teeth, clawed hands, and unmoving mother-of-pearl-like eyes make them really intimidating to look at. So this is a story of how the two of them make the best of the situation that they've basically been thrown into, which is this forced marriage. And I think that the core of the story is how honesty makes for such a deeper relationship between two characters.
Good. So no miscommunication trope.
No, definitely no miscommunication.
Good. Sold.
Although I don't know that would actually work for a YA romance because young adults are terrible at communicating. I'm saying.
I
don't actually know whether
too harshly.
Okay.
Maybe. I mean, maybe. They haven't potentially had much experience communicating the deeper thoughts because they're still forming. Which is fair.
I think a lot of the...
I don't know. I've watched some TikToks that pack more into a minute than I thought possible.
Well, yes. I mean, there's the magic of editing too. Editing and retakes.
I think where the YA side of things tends to come though with these romances is more so the fact that the characters are
Younger,
mid to late teens rather than being in their 20s or 30s.
A lot of the fun of YA romance comes from the fact that age group, just everything is dialed up to 11. Like all their emotions are so intense that it makes it fun to read the romance because like it's just intense. When I fell in love the last time, it was a slow burn.
Slow burns.
That's a different trope.
And there's a lack of context and comparison, which also makes it seem more impactful.
Right. No, I mean I love YA fantasy.
The first time you fall in love is always one you remember, right?
Oh,
I don't know if I've ever fallen in love. I know that sounds really bad, but anyway, we're not here to talk about my love life. So,
Amanda, would you like to tell us about your love life?
Nope. Mirlyah, did you have another recommendation? Or
I did have a second recommendation. Again, it's another young adult fantasy romance. Well, obviously it's romance. It is called The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. Mm-hmm. This book has been described as a Slytherin romance. I have no idea what that is supposed to mean, and I don't think it's actually been defined, but I think that the idea is that there's an element of darkness to it. I'm not really sure.
Are the characters like really ambitious?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I think that's where the Slytherin comes from. Yeah.
The plot of the book is described as that the main character, her name is Alessandra, and her plan is to woo the king, marry the king, kill the king, and then take over his kingdom. There is a large amount of female empowerment that is, she is a person who knows what she wants in life and is not afraid to grab it. And there is a lot of
she grabbed it. Sorry.
I was going to say it's empowerment murder.
No!
Anyway.
She grabbed his neck.
Well, see, that's part of the thing because he can't. She's not actually allowed to touch the king. There's a whole element of the story that goes into it. There is a small amount of almost, I guess, forbidden love that is within this story, but there's also a large amount of exploration of societal issues, and for a young adult book, I think it's quite good exploration of not conforming to what society expects you to do. and that if you did things the way that you want to do them, you're more likely to be happy in your life.
I think Kip, you had mentioned earlier in the episode, like there are deeper themes or learnings that we can get out of the romance books other than just the fun, fluffy, optimistic adventure. And
Yeah.
I think what Mirlyah, you're saying in this book, I think I'm getting that sense that there's that social commentary and also a personal commentary, the level 2s and the level 3s of storytelling.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm intrigued, and it will be on my TBR for a while until I can get to it.
Oh, it does sound like a fun book, but yeah, I hear you.
Yeah,
They are
I mean,
relatively short, being young adult books, and
mhm.
Yeah.
sort of books that you can't put down.
Yeah,
it's-
I like those, and you need those, right? You need those books that just like capture attention, doesn't require too much brain power, but is still enjoyable and has something to say.
And it's like a weekend instead of
A month?
a month. It's not
Yeah.
Rhythm of War, okay?
Yeah.
What? That only took me a couple days.
Okay.
Well,
Show
me
off.
3. But I did audio.
I don't read that fast. Okay, I'll move on to my recommendations. So I've got 2. One is a science fiction one, and it's also a graphic novel series. There are only 3 volumes, so it's a short series. It's called Alex and Ada. It is a male-female romance about a man who receives a female android for his birthday, and things go from there. And this is a little bit of like enemies to lovers, forced proximity, but it also takes the manic pixie dream girl,
Manic Pixie Dream Girl.
yeah, trope, and if it does flip it on its head, which I really enjoy because I don't enjoy the manic pixie dream girl trope, which that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, I was originally going to pick that as my least favorite trope, but I would have gone on too long. Anyway, so this graphic novel series, it is a bit more than just a romance. It tackles the question of personhood and whether sentient androids are people, like what's the distinction. But the story primarily focuses on Alex and Ada, and I think people should give it a try. It's the art style is pretty simple, but I didn't mind it. It was really the story. And it's not going to be as like deep and in-depth as like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, but you get enough of the meat without the writing of Philip K. Dick.
It's probably better and more readable.
Anyway, there's a
I'm
whole
just
other
saying.
episode that we did about dystopians and utopias where we talk about that book. Anyway, so yeah, Alex and Ada. And it's a quick read. My other recommendation, I can recommend at least the first 2 books of the series because I'm currently reading the 3rd. And I think this is categorized as YA fantasy romance, but it's the Parasol Protectorate series by Gail Carriger. The main character is Alexia Terabody, and she has no soul. So it's paranormal. She's known as a preternatural, and these creatures are very mysterious. She's human, but more than human, or maybe less than human, depending on how you want to look at it. But there are werewolves involved and vampires. And I know what you're thinking, but no, it's not like that. It's a Victorian paranormal setting, which I also love. And what I really love about the series so far is I really love the characters and their banter. I just love the sass. I need more of it. Lev Grossman, author of the Magician series, actually blurbed the series, and he said, Soulless, which is the first book, Soulless has all the delicate charm of a Victorian parasol and all the wicked force of a Victorian parasol secretly weighted with brass shot and expertly wielded. Ravishing. So it's the series I'm trying to get Little Red to read as well.
I'm reading a lot.
I know you are. I know.
I gotta reread Brightness Reef, and I gotta reread Murderbot, and
I mean, I'll give you Murderbot. I understand, but like after reading Dead House Gates, I was like, I need something
hear ya.
light and happy, and
Ooh, yeah.
this is what I got.
No, it's just not right now. is all. I just can't do it right now.
Eventually, I'll get you to read it.
I'm sure you will.
I mean, hopefully I will have finished the series by the time you get to it, because I started the series like 3 years ago. I'm really bad at finishing series, okay? I admit it. Even like books I really enjoy.
Don't tell the Melisande folk that.
I mean, I already told them that I'm really bad at finishing series, but see, here's the other thing. With Malazan, I at least have people that are reading it with me. That's like encouraging me to continue to
Yeah.
the next book. When
Yeah.
I'm left to my own devices, I'm like, oh, look, there's another book. There's another shiny series to start.
So I'm the opposite. Normally I read a whole series, but Bingo is really messing with that. Because I can
Yeah.
only read one book,
author.
one author. And so there's like, I have the 10,000 Kingdom series I want to finish, and
There's a
Anyway.
lot.
So, like, would you prefer that books have cliffhanger endings that, like, you need to read the next one in order to get a sense of
No.
closure?
Actually.
Would that help you finish series, Panda?
Oh. Sorry.
Yes, that would help. I'm not gonna say it's a guarantee, but yes, it would help.
I often find that
I've got a wreck then.
Ooh,
I'm
okay.
I'm always disappointed with cliffhanger endings, because I find that when I've got a book that finishes with a cliffhanger and then you go to the next book, they start somewhere else.
You know, that's true. That is very true.
And I'm like, but I just wanted to read what happens.
I want a continuation.
This book does not do that.
Okay, Kip. What's your rec? Wait, is it romance?
Okay, it's
Okay.
romance.
Give me
is
this
the
rec.
Knight and the Necromancer.
Okay. I've never heard
I
of
think
it.
I've got that on my list.
You start off with 2 points of view. You've got your knight, you've got your necromancer, and they meet together in a gay bar for the first time. And the knight is hiding that he is secretly prince of the kingdom. Like, people there kind of know, but if you're new, maybe you wouldn't. He goes under an assumed name there. And the necromancer, he's brand new in the city, and he's preparing for a meeting with the royal family the next day, but he doesn't know what the prince looks like.
Oh, wait. Okay. Is this
And
is the
Mistaken
author
identity.
A.H. Lee?
yes.
Okay. I'm on Goodreads right now.
And it's 3 books. It's a trilogy. I do not think they work well as standalones, but as a completed trilogy, which you can finish in one night like I did, I think it works great.
I have marked it as to read. It's now on my list.
So you've got some like mistaken identity at the start because the knight thinks that he's just some like scholar based on his clothing and general attitude of not wanting anyone to sit next to him. And then it goes from
I'm just
there.
gonna say this.
It's
Reading on Goodreads here. The Knight and the Necromancer is a trilogy with satisfying HEA at the end of book 3. Happily ever
Yeah.
after. Steamy scenes.
Yeah.
Adults only. Okay. Putting that out there.
I think it's on the slightly more chaste side, but no, there's some steamy scenes, sure.
And that's the thing is like,
I mean,
you can have. Yes, Little Red.
What Red?
I think that what you would qualify as chaste is maybe a little different.
I guess we shall find out.
Look, there's quite a few like travelogues where like they're like going from point A to point B, and they're like describe the journey along the way. There's quite a few of those, and there's also quite a few scenes where the necromancer does some truly awesome necromancy.
Okay, that's cool.
One scene in particular, I still laugh at.
I do want to add one recommendation.
Okay.
And that is The Fairy Godmother by Mercedes Lackey. It's the first book in the 500 Kingdom series, and they're all fairy tale retellings. The first one is Cinderella.
I do like a good Cinderella retelling. Are there? Is it adults only?
Oh no,
The Fairy
I mean,
Godmother. Okay.
I would
I
say
just need to know what I'm walking into here.
it's not quite Fade to Black, but it's pretty close to Fade to Black.
Okay. I think, like there are romance books that have erotic moments, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are erotica. I think there is a difference. So,
Sure.
Right. And see, I got Mona Lisa thinking it was just a romance. And then I started reading it, I was like, whoops.
The Knight and the Necromancer has some great like combat scenes in it too, which are fun.
I think more like males. Would this be a good entry point for them? I don't know.
For gay men.
Okay, for gay men.
If I'm gonna go for like my secret subtle entry point into romance, I'm gonna tell people to read the Vorkosigan saga, and then like when they get to some books, they'll be like, "Wait, this isn't space action. This is like
rom-com.
this is like on the ground wedding.
Yep.
What is going on?"
Wait, was this your plan to secretly get people to read that series? Is this a civil campaign?
this my plan?
No, a civil campaign.
Yes, this is a civil campaign.
Okay.
That's the one that's like actually romance. I could say that maybe Ethan of Athos, which is earlier in the series and is actually a standalone, is also romance, but it's not a particularly good one.
Okay.
Well, I mean, Cordelia's
It was
Honor.
good for the time.
It's not
Cordelia's Honors is like kind of
a
not
romance,
really.
yeah. But I mean, there is a romance
Yeah.
element to it.
Is
It's pretty
this
strong.
the one that's like
Yeah.
20-something books long?
Yeah,
This
something like
series?
that.
Like yeah, it's like 19 or something.
The Red Queen and
Gentleman Joel's like it's around 20.
Yeah.
Sure.
the Red Queen and
Okay.
Gentleman Joel's is kind of a romance too.
I think
Pretty
it's gonna take
it's
me
kind
like
of
a few
romance.
decades
Yep.
to.
Bujold is definitely very character driven. I read Vorkosigan right after I read Malazan.
You are a. I
And I
don't
was
know
like,
how.
This is lovely and light, and I ripped through it in a month, and it was
They
great.
are. They're really not. It's not hard reading at all.
Okay, good to know. Did everybody give the recommendations that they wanted to?
I wanted to say one more. I wanted to bring in Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell, which is a sci-fi retelling. It has an arranged marriage to start off the book. They're like, okay, this is just going to be a sham. This is going to be just, something to cement a peace deal. But it turns into more than that. And I can't really go that far into it. But I will say that you have the prince, and then you have what's basically a political hostage by marriage. You get into the past of both of them, and it's fun and it's interesting. And there's some of my favorite tropes, and I think some things that could be done badly, some things that really could be done badly, but were done very well around like consent and agency, particularly.
I'm glad you brought it up because I wanted you to read it and let me know what you thought before I even put it on my list to read. So thanks. You're
Okay.
my canary.
I do my job of pronouncing woke or not woke on romance books.
Oh man, I think that's gonna have to be a hashtag.
I don't want you to ever look at my book.
Mirlyah, did you have one more?
I have lots of books that I could recommend, but they're not overall general recommendations that I would put on this discussion.
Okie dokie.
I'm the only one who put out the erotica. Okay.
I mean, I don't know what the Knights of Necromancer would be considered. So
I wouldn't call it erotica. I would say it has some steamy scenes.
Okay.
But I would not call it erotica.
Good to know. I mean, the covers of those books are not as.
I mean, covers of romance books
Terrible.
are just. They're just shirtless men, right? They're just shirtless men.
Dude, where's my shirt?
Dude, where's my shirt?
Maybe that's the other hashtag.
Myth about romance books. That's one of them. And it's it's pretty true. I can't fight it.
The Knight and the Necromancer, the covers, at least the ones that I'm seeing, do not feature men who are shirtless. They just feature their heads. So
their
There we
heads.
their faces. It features
True.
their
I wasn't
faces.
thinking the other one. I was
They
just
have-
like,
They have clothes on, but you know what? If someone has chainmail on, that's almost as good as being shirtless.
Okay.
I mean, if that's your thing, whatever.
I don't know that I'd want to be wearing chainmail without a shirt on, though.
Right?
Yeah, good point.
I mean, it looks like he has at least part of like plate mail on or something. And maybe a gambeson underneath. We'll see.
Okie dokie. Any last thoughts? No? Okay, good. But seriously.
I mean, if anyone does, I have read quite a lot of the popular young adult romance authors. So if anyone does need more recommendations, then I'm happy to provide some.
to our Discord. Speaking of Discord, okay, this concludes our episode about SFF romance and just kind of romance in general. Did we convince you to give some of these SFF romances a try? Join the Legendarium's Discord and let us know. The invite link is on thelegendarium.com. We are also on Twitter at Green Team Pod. If you've enjoyed our content, please consider supporting Craig and the Legendarium via Patreon. Shout out to Horizon Brave for starting it all. Thank you to our lovely panelists, Mirlyah, Little Red Book, and Kyptan. I'm Befuddled Panda. Until next time. Goodbye.
Bye. Also Twilight.
Yeah.
And if you think
Well,
about it, the
that is
story
the
between the
vampire
two is exactly the same.
I'm sorry, what?
On
No,
the
but I think
whole,
Twilight
story
came out of
between the
AO3 as
two.
well.
Did it really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is why 50 Shades of Grey is like meta fanfic.
Oh my god. I was trying to not say the T word.